And they're right on the front line in strategic territory. And they want to be in NATO because they're scared to death.
Victor Davis Hanson argues that Trump's presidency represents a rare moment of national recalibration.
And the French and the British are sort of stepping up because they're scared of Ukraine. And they know that Trump has called their bluff.
A break from decades of drift in which political elites and global institutions slowly diluted America's economic and cultural foundations.
Maybe we hate him because what he represents, but he's done a lot more for us than Obama or Biden. They were never there when we needed them.
For Hanson, Trump's return to the White House is not just another partisan shift. It is a structural pivot.
So he's got to go back and say it was worth it because I am now 200 or 300. I am halfway to Kiev. He's not going to get that. So what he's doing now is he's probing, sending drones, overflying Hungary, Poland, especially Poland, and he's trying to distract everybody so he can say, well, we're in a war with NATO, or we have a crisis with NATO. It has nothing to do with Ukraine, and I'm standing up to NATO and NATO. And it's a distraction. And the problem he has is, had he just left it alone, NATO was on a downward trajectory. It was at the end of history, naivete. It was not army. They were going to get down to nobody was going to pay 2%, except the countries right on the front line. And now what has he achieved? They've got the only two countries, I think, in the last 10 years that are really worth the deal.
A chance for the United States to restore the self-confidence and civic coherence that once defined it. He believes that if Trump's agenda is carried through with discipline, America could re-enter a period of revitalization.
And that is Finland, who has the best artillery per capita in the whole continent, and fight like blank if you see it, what they did in the Winter War of 39 to 1940. And then more importantly, the Swedes, and I'm chauvinistic here as Swedish, but they have one of the most effective and competent and state-of-the-art industrial complexes as far as military. They have SAB fighters, they have armored vehicles. And they're right on the front line in strategic territory. And they want to be in NATO because they're scared to death. And so he's strengthened NATO, Putin.
Yes. Who do you see as the weakest of the European? I guess the significant weakest, meaning is Germany the weakest because they were so demilitarized and emasculated after World
Germany
War II?
is on a suicidal trajectory with its energy policy. It's got negative or flat GDP.
Marked by stronger borders, revived industry, and a renewed sense of national purpose. Hanson warns, however, that the path forward will not be smooth.
The military was a joke. I think they had 12 active tanks. But after Ukraine, they are rearming now. And we fought them in 2 wars. I mean, Germany is Germany is Germany. If they want to rearm, their Leopard tanks, their most recent model is some of the best in the world. They will be very adept. The worst, as far as the government, is the Spanish. They have already said they're not going to make the 5%. They don't want to. I don't think they're even at 2%. They've got a hard left government, and Western Europeans, unlike the Dutch and the French and the British, are sort of stepping up because they're scared of Ukraine. And they know that Trump has called their bluff and basically said, you've got 500 million people, we have 350, and you're way over there, and you want us to come all the way over there with 60% of your population and defend you at 17 or 18% of your budget. We're not going to do it.
In his view, Trump's reforms threaten entrenched interests that have grown accustomed to managing decline. Bureaucracies invested in regulatory sprawl, media ecosystems that thrive on polarization.
And that said, well, we need you. And I say we need you is that they have 2,000 top-of-the-line fighters, but the difference with the United States is you get the whole kabang. You get the logistics, the tankers, the C-17s, the C-130s. You get all of the support network. You get the intel. You get all of it. And if you divorce from NATO, they're going to be overrun by Putin. And they know that. And they also know something they do not want to admit. And I can tell you from the interviews, I can tell you what it is. They understand that when Obama or Biden is there and they talk a great game and how they love Europe and they're sophisticated and the elites from Oxford, the Sorbonne, Heidelberg, Cambridge mingle with our elites at Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Stanford, and BBC, NPR, all that stuff doesn't mean anything.
And foreign partners comfortable with American concessions. This resistance, Hanson argues, is not accidental.
When the rubber hits the road, it's whether a president will use its authority, his authority, and the military to guarantee their sanctity. And that means if the Red Sea is shut down by the Houthis and nobody can get out to the Mediterranean through the Suez Canal to import oil, somebody's got to deal with the Houthis. Somebody's got to deal with the Iranians because they know what the Iranians were up to. It wasn't just to give long-range missiles to destroy Israel. It was to point at Europe. That's what the whole hot mic in Seoul, South Korea was about in 2014, that Putin wanted to disband missile defense. But the reason that the Bush administration had started that with the Czech Republic was to save them from threats from Iran. Putin said, well, that's just an excuse. No, it wasn't an excuse. So Europe wanted somebody to deal with that.
It is the predictable backlash of institutions that prospered while the country's middle class absorbed the costs of globalization, offshoring, and cultural fragmentation.
They knew that they were mice and they didn't want that cat to devour them, and they wanted somebody to put a bell around his neck, and that was Trump. And he did that. And now they're relieved, and now they're thinking, wow, he's giving $170 million, even though his base hates him for that, in Ukraine. Wow, there's no more Houthis disrupting our sea lanes. Wow. He didn't call the Saudis a pariah. He's on their side, and they're not gonna. And Iran is impotent now, and you can go in and get our oil at the Straits of Hormuz without worries. And wow, he stood up to Putin. Wow, he's dealing with the Chinese that take us to the cleaners, and maybe we hate him because what he represents, but he's done a lot more for us than Obama or Biden. They were never there when we needed them.
For him, Trump's presidency forces a confrontation that America has avoided for too long.
So they're starting. When I was doing these interviews, it was sort of like, when you pointed that out to them, it was sort of like, wow, maybe I like this. I don't know if I have all the accents; they're so varied, but I did 5 of them in the last 6 days. Yes, these are very interesting ideas. I had thought of some of them, but not all of them. Let me ponder them. Let me digest them. Not that I agree with them. They're very controversial. I don't think they're reflective of all of America, but this is insightful, meaning this is the truth, and we can't make it and don't talk about that because our buddies in America are all left-wing, and they hate Trump, and so we have to too. And I can't believe that Trump is in our interest, but that you made the case. I think he probably is secretly. I can't tell anybody that. So that's where they are.
At the cultural level, Hanson sees Trump as a disruptive corrective to what he considers decades of ideological capture.
I liked your emasculated European voice. But Victor, let's go
like
ahead.
Europeans, I actually do. Every time I've done an interview, and I've done a lot
really
with German
smart.
media, this was Spiegel Video or whatever. I did one with Stern once. It's something about German media. I just expect them to say, we find you a very interesting person we would like to interview. And then it's a hit ambush, all left wing. And that's not true of the Swiss. It's not true of the Austrians. I have some of the, if I deal with a Greek left-wing newspaper or central, they're fair. I deal with the French. I've done interviews with them, fair. Italians, fair. British, fair. Not the Germans. I've never had an interview with a German media outlet that wasn't left-wing and trying to get me into a position where I'll agree with some left-wing thing so they can take a clip and say, this is an American who agrees with us. Last week, the FBI, under the aegis of the Department of Justice, raided John Bolton, the former National Security Advisor to Donald Trump during his first term, and they raided his home and his house, and they took away documents which allegedly the target of the raid were these documents. Bolton was not arrested, he was not indicted, there were no effort aimed at him personally, but the accusation apparently was that he had removed classified documents. Almost immediately, the left and the Never Trump right said, see, we told you Donald Trump is on a revenge tour.
The media refuses to admit this imbalance. Bolton's case is tied to foreign policy secrets.
It was Brennan, and then Clapper, then Comey. He'll go after Fauci. Anybody that doesn't have a pardon is fair game. But there's more to the story than that. In 2019, when Trump fired John Bolton as National Security Advisor, he was writing a book, and he sold that book on the premise that he had been in the room. The title was essentially, This Happened in the Room, or What Happened in the Room. And he took prodigious notes. So he was supposed to be this anti-Trump, high-level appointee and famous in the conservative circles as a war hawk and interventionist.
They are selective. They are targeted. They are designed not just to gather evidence, but to send a message.
But he had intimate knowledge about how Donald Trump functioned abroad with major allies and enemies and rivals and neutrals, and how he was at home. And he wrote this damning book, memoir, about Trump. The Trump DOJ said he's just trying to write this right during the campaign season, and he's a surrogate for the Biden campaign in his bitterness. He's angry. But more importantly, he is using this classified information through the filter of the notes he took, and he's going to hurt U.S. national security. So they filed, the DOJ, a motion to stop the publication. The book was almost out. A federal judge at Lambert looked at it, and he basically said, well, I can't really stop the book. It's going to be released in a few days. But in kind of a rare excursus, he said, John Bolton, you're doing something wrong. You are violating, likely, national security laws.
What the media won't tell you is that raids like this are political.
And if you don't stop, you'll be subject at some point to criminal prosecution. And then he let it rest. Then the DOJ kept investigating. Donald Trump lost the election. During the transition, they looked at it, the Biden transition. When Biden came into office, they dropped it by June, 6 months. So now the question is, did they go in to get these documents last week because they were on a revenge tour, retribution against Bolton, because he's been all over left-wing cable news, specifically CNN and, more importantly, MSNBC, and he's been blasting Donald Trump on everything. The Iran bombing, the Ukraine war, using federal troops in Washington. And therefore, he made himself a target. And this is old hat that he says. Everybody has adjudicated this. There's two things to watch to see whether Bolton is accurate. But I would, before I'd finish by talking about those two criteria, I will say that when Donald Trump's home was raided on August 9, 2022, John Bolton spoke out.
He once served Republican administrations. He clashed with Donald Trump.
And he said, let's not prejudge you, basically, you pro-Trumpers. Let's just let all the evidence be seen before we make snap judges, meaning, he's probably guilty. But more importantly, then he said Donald Trump was just anything that came across his desk. If he saw French fries, he got them. If he saw classified documents, he did, just because he could. And then on another occasion, he has no respect for classification, and that's a lie that he personally classified these. So he was very critical of anybody who objected to what he think was an FBI legitimate raid on Mar-a-Lago. Now it's ironic. We'll see if he uses the same tropes and themes to protect himself in the way that he blasted Trump about a similar raid.
But look closer. We see the same script. Selective leaks, anonymous officials, headlines designed to humiliate before trial.
But what we're looking at is to see if it was justified or whether it was vengeful. And if it's just about an old matter 4 years ago that the Biden administration, for political reasons, dropped, but a federal judge said, you know what, there's something there, but it was dropped, to go back and rehash that, I don't think is going to be worth it.
He positioned himself as a defender of the old order. That makes him useful to some, but also dangerous to others.
And maybe it was a vengeful shot across the bow to Bolton. He probably wouldn't be charged, but also to other people like Comey and Clapper and Brennan, Fauci, Mark Miller, all of you, be careful. You've done something wrong and we're going to investigate you, and that's going to cost you a lot of money for legal counsel. That would not be good if that were true. But here's why I don't think it's quite like that. To get the FBI's permission to go into the Bolton home, you had to have 2 different federal judges examine the request, the permission to enter the Bolton home and office, and they did give it, and they're disinterested third parties. Second, why did the Biden administration drop this investigation?
The FBI raid reveals a deeper pattern.
They never even told us. And apparently they dropped it because Bolton had become an ally of the left and they did not want to put him in legal jeopardy. And third and finally, there were leaks, rumors that the FBI went in there not to examine the old charges of his notes that were used to improperly to write his critical anti-Trump book, but because there had been allegations for a long time that John Bolton transferred classified information. That doesn't mean he downloaded in attachments necessarily CIA or FBI analyses or national security assessments. It just meant that he was trying to transfer some information that he should not to his family, as if he could evade surveillance by intelligence authorities of any impropriety. If he did that.
For years, the Department of Justice and the FBI have been politicized.
And he actually, as some of the rumors say, then it's a different story. That would be new information, and that would mean that John Bolton, maybe to write his notes, maybe to enhance his career as a consultant, or a think tanker, or as an author, or just a gadfly, was going back and looking at things that transpired during his first term service. And it was only a year, but nevertheless, to chronicle it, he didn't just write it down in his notebook, which could be found and subpoenaed, but he sent emails to particular people, namely his family, to memorialize that. If that's true, he has legal jeopardy. So it's either likely something that should not have happened, a vengeful tour, revenge tour, retribution, payback. I think more likely there's something there, or two, as I said, 2 federal judges would not have given permission to look.
Once political figures are consistently dehumanized by media and institutions, Hanson warns, the boundary between rhetoric and violence begins to blur.
And then we look at Charlie, who could out-debate them. And it shows you that we all have to take a hard look at higher education. I grew up with the idea on this farm because my grandfather told me that he didn't have any sons, and he was going to send all 3 of his daughters, even one that was crippled with polio. She tried to go to Stanford, but she went to San Jose State. The other 2 girls, my aunt and mother, got BAs and then graduate degrees at Stanford. And that we were inculcated that even though we were out in the middle of nowhere in this little farm, higher education was the answer, the enlightenment. And I went to UC Santa Cruz. I think it did a lot of damage to people there in the 70s. I don't know if I would go to that campus again, but I got a good education. I went to Stanford, PhD. I had all left-wing professors, but they were all liberal and enlightened. They didn't inject their politics. What I'm getting at, I don't believe that anymore, I'm afraid to say. I don't believe that a college education is necessarily a beneficial thing to people, because 95% of the faculty are left-wing, and out of that 95%, 50% of them are not left-wing, they're radically left-wing.
In his view, Kirk's passing highlights the human cost of a culture where disagreement quickly mutates into vilification, and dissenters are treated as enemies rather than opponents.
Because they were always talking about killing him. These people are really not good people. These young left-wing people on social media, everybody's in danger from them. And I don't know how and Charlie Kirk was trying to engage, prove me wrong. That was his tour. I'm going to go out and talk. Instead, there's something there, though, finally, there's something there we will find out, because this was a planned political assassination, and I doubt that person acted entirely alone. It was too professionally carried out. I don't think he was a professional assassin. I think he was a college-age student that was angry at him about his conservative traditionalism, and he and somebody else talked about it or helped, and I think we'll find out. Don't expect the left to disown it, because Congress wanted a moment of silence for Charlie Kirk.
He also underscores the dangerous precedent such hostility sets.
There were certain people that are in danger, I think, right now. And these are people who have affected change. One of them is Donald Trump. They've tried to kill him twice, and after each time, people celebrated on the internet, as they did with Charlie Kirk. This morning I was looking, I could not believe what people were saying. And then you have these actors, Patton Oswalt or Mark Hamill that was in Star Trek, they're saying things that are absolutely outrageous. They're sending memes about Trump being killed, and then the next person who's in danger is Elon Musk and Charlie Kirk. There's a lot of people, and I don't know how and when you couple this with the reaction to Brian Thompson, the CEO of United Health, and Taylor Lorenz, as I mentioned earlier, they made a hero out of Luigi Mangione. They want to name a ballot proposition after him here. He is a cold-blooded assassin. So where did this radicalism come from? Donald Trump just exposed it. He tore off the scab and looked at the putrid wound beneath, but he didn't create it.
Hanson emphasizes that Kirk's career demonstrated how disruptive one voice could be. By mobilizing students, speaking unapologetically on cultural issues, and confronting progressive assumptions.
Then the question, just before we get to Charlie himself, was during that question, he was shot right when he was answering a question where the question was, how many transgender shooters? And it was kind of a trick question. And Charlie said, well, how many were not gang related? And then he was shot. That was very crazy. And I don't know, I don't want to give currency to any theory, but it was very strange that somebody, if this is true, and I can't confirm it, the news accounts that there were imagery on a bullet with transgender, that the person asking the question at the time when he was shot. So that can be a coincidence, but it's a terrible coincidence.
For Hanson, the tragedy reveals how quickly contempt for political adversaries can evolve into something much darker.
There were other reports, and I want to be very careful what I said, that there were other bullets in the chamber. In other words, he thought probably he was going to shoot 2 or 3 times. With the first shot, he could tell from his scope was a lethal one. And then he made his getaway, but there were engraved bullets with messages on them. I don't know, symbols that somebody had carved into them. And supposedly, according to the Daily Mail, one of them had transgender imagery on it. I don't know what that is. But the other thing is, I think they will find him because the gun can be traced. They can go to, if he's a student age shooter, they can go to every gun range in the area or anywhere and ask if there was a person, fitting that description who wanted to practice with a 30 caliber, 30-06 rifle. So I think the FBI will find him.
Hanson argues that years of vilification in media and academia made Kirk into a symbol rather than a man.
And the assassination yesterday of Charlie Kirk, and 2 weeks ago the assassination of Irina Zarutska, we're at a turning point. I think people, and then when you add on the Auburn professor who was butchered, 57-year-old professor of veterinary medicine, and she was butchered by a felon who was out, who shouldn't have been, just like Carlos Brown was a 14-time felon who should not have been out. And then you factor in the mayor of Charlotte, who said, let's not use this to judge people, and let's not be judgmental on homeless people, and you can't arrest your way out of these problems.
He also criticizes the broader cultural forces that contributed to this environment.
Charlie Cook make this a racial. He didn't do that, Van Jones. He didn't make it a racial. Carlos Brown made it a racial. Listen to the tape. After he slits her throat and then gets up and walks nonchalantly by, and the three other occupants, the other three black Americans, watch her and don't lift a finger as she bleeds to death. He walks out dripping blood and he says, got the white girl. He says it twice. You can hear it on the video. Got that white girl. And no one does anything for at least a minute and a half. But the people right next to her might have saved her life. All they had to do was stop the bleeding. Or if they saw him trying to stab, just try to resist him. But of course, you know, if it was opposite, I hate to say this, and I'm not trying to incite passions, but if that was a young 23-year-old immigrant from Nigeria, let's say, young black woman, all by herself, and she got on that train, and there were three white people to her right, and a white person with long hair who looked kind of scruffy.
Kirk's life, and now his death, illustrate the risks of a society that thrives on polarization rather than persuasion.
Yes, well, I'm speaking on a Thursday morning, and it has not even been 24 hours since the news came. There's been these horrific videos of his actual last moment of life, really, that wound. Apparently, the shooter has been identified, not his ID, but identified in the sense as they see where he was, they know where he went. He dropped it said 30 caliber rifle, but I think bolt action. I have one like it here. I think it's a 30-06. That's a very powerful, accurate weapon, especially at 200 yards. So when people said he was a trained assassin, I think anybody who went to a range with a 30-06 with a scope on it could hit something at 200 yards, especially from a downward slope. I used to target practice with it. It's a very lethal gun.